All right. Good morning, everybody. It's Ron Moore and Doug Plucknette. And today we're talking about organizational alignment. So I wanted to thank everybody for joining us. If you have questions, you can send them in and we'll try to respond to those separately. So Doug, any comments before we get started?
No, just good to see your face smiling.
Oh,
And well, we had planned to be on yesterday live. Sometimes those things don't work out. So here we are today, and those questions, send them in and we will get back by email this time. So at any rate, I'm ready to get started.
Okay.
This is really your deal here, aligning the organization. All
right. Well, why don't we start? Let me just, maybe make a few observations and you can jump in whenever you think appropriate, Doug. I guess the first question you might ask would be why do we need to align an organization? Everybody says that. Oh, we're not aligned. We're operating at cross purposes and so on and so forth. And I mean, it's sort of intuitively obvious that you need organizational alignment. So one of the questions might be, are organizations generally aligned? And I've got some data. I'll just read from this data. This is a Harris poll, and it says only 37% of employees had a clear understanding of what the organization was trying to achieve. So if you don't know what you're trying to achieve, achieving anything is fine, I reckon. That doesn't sound too smart, but that's what the data suggests. It says 20% saw a clear connection between their tasks and the organization's goals. Well, if your task isn't supporting the organizational goals, then how do you know your task is worth doing? Another one, 15% felt the organization enabled them to achieve their goals, whatever they are, as it relates to the organization goals. 10% felt their organization held people accountable. Wow, that's incredible. And finally, and there's more, but the last one I'm going to read, 13% felt there was a high trust, highly cooperative working relationship with other groups or departments. Boy, that's pretty, what I guess you'd call it damning survey about whether or not organizations are aligned and so on. Well, one of my observations about organizational alignment is this: in any organization, in every organization, you have different departments, different people. They all have different personalities, different skills, different objectives, different values, and so on. So if you don't make it clear what the organization expects, then each one of those individuals will operate autonomously, and what you'll likely have is anarchy. So I would presume that anarchy is not the objective, or chaos, or any of those sort of things. So I think it's really critical that the organization be aligned to a common strategy, a common set of goals, and some common measures that people use to determine whether or not they're being successful. So that's just some data. Even if that data, by the way, even if that data is only half right, suppose it's twice as good, it's still awful. So, a lot of these surveys, that's what I do. I take data and surveys and all that, and I say, well, what if it's half as bad or half as good? Double it or halve it. Well, is it still informative? Is it still give you information that you can use to be directionally correct? And that's the case here. So I'll pause there. Doug, you have comments on that?
Well, sadly, when you look at the first number that you came up with, which was in the 30s, the people that felt they knew the direction of the company, You could also look at that number and say, what percentage of those uh, were people that were driven to find that information out on their own, right?
Yeah.
Because some people are naturally that way. That would be the type of person I am. I want to know where we're going, what we're doing, who our main customers are, right? The products that we make, and what are our top selling products, and how well do we do this or that, and then where do we stand financially, and what were our sales month to month. That type of information, most companies that we work with, isn't readily available to the employees, right? So
Yeah.
some will naturally seek that out, and sometimes they're given answers and sometimes they're not. Um, so then even more than credible than that number was each number that you came after that dropped off, right?
Right.
So it's an indication that, like most companies, they're working in silos, right? And they don't have a common goal. They may think they do, but as employees don't see it, or they don't understand it, or it's not updated on a regular basis, so they don't know where they stand with it. And that's really one of the things is this transparency. It's a word that we talk about a lot, but it's pretty rare in the manufacturing world that
Yeah.
the folks that are actually running things are communicating right down to the shop floor what's going on within the company, so that people become engaged. Right, the more information you give people, the more likely they are to be engaged with what you're trying to do.
Yeah. Well, and you're probably in that group of 20% that are actively engaged. You want to know, you want guidance, you're seeking, the ability to do a better job. Uh, I mean, I don't know exactly where these numbers come from, and they're not meant to be precise. It's one of those, if it's half as good or twice as good. And then maybe another 60% are they're the folks that wait and see. They're not going to adopt anything new. They're not going to be particularly inquisitive. And then you got another 20% that are, you know, showing up. In fact, they're sometimes showing up to be miscreants and malcontents. So, anyways, that's just another indication of the need for alignment, so that folks apply the skills, the values, the talent, and so on that they have to achieve a common objective. So, with that data in mind, of course, it's really important that, that alignment occur. And I think the first step, at least at the executive level, that you have to do is to articulate a strategy, a set of goals, and a set of roles. And in fact, you have to do that in such a manner as that the folks doing the work understand how they fit into achieving the goals and how they fit into supporting the strategy. And if they don't, give them an avenue to get clarification for that. And I mean, that's a start. In fact, it's a great start. And very often there's no clear link between the guy doing the work and the strategy and goals. At least it hasn't been articulated. So I think it's really important that occur within the organization. Um, One other comment before I forget, you'll never get perfect alignment. It just will not happen. And I actually think that's a good thing. You don't want, I don't think at least, you want people operating in lockstep, or you don't want a bunch of obsequious sycophants, yes people throughout the organization. What you do want is a little bit of tension that helps flush out issues while keeping in mind the overall strategy and goals. And that in a good environment, that can be very beneficial, very helpful. In a bad environment, well, you may tend towards chaos again if you don't have a process for assuring that people keep those common objectives in mind. So I'll turn it back to you, see if you have any comments before I blather on.
Well, you've twice mentioned the word chaos, and it reminds me of a manager that I worked with at one time that said he felt that change came from chaos, right? that sometimes you even have to create it. And I kind of looked at him and went, "What, are you crazy or what?" And I think what he was gathered at was sometimes when you end up in that position where you have to fight the fire, you learn a lot of things, right?
Yeah. Well, chaos will come to you. You don't need to create it. You know,
Isn't that the truth?
it's just a natural phenomenon. Problems occur and they have to be addressed.
So the other piece of this that I've seen in the past that, and I'm sure you can speak very well to this, is the popularity of team charters and things like that. Uh, I I'm a person that says I like the upfront planning. I like to see things like that, but don't think a signature is what's going to get you buy-in, right?
Yeah.
That somebody signed a piece of paper. Um, that comes into play with lots of things. You know, when I go out and do RCM, we create a charter and we what I call a contract. We get managers to sign off on it. And the reason I do that is I tell the employees, this is your opportunity to go ahead and make improvement. And if we're struggling to implement these things, go back and remind the people who signed off on this that they said they'd support it, right?
Yeah.
Um, so
But
where do you get started with this? That's the question I think that most people want to or have for a fellow like you.
yeah, well, getting started, I guess just start is, is my common refrain. It really depends on where the influencers are in the organization. I tend to think at the executive level, and the starting point is the executive, the CEO or the VP of manufacturing at whatever level the the organization is being driven to achieve a particular set of goals and and apply a particular strategy. Whoever's in charge of that has to spell it out, articulate it, support it, encourage it, resource it, all that sort of thing. So it can start at mid-management, say at a plant level or even a departmental functional level, and then drive upward with a business case and some success stories and all that sort of thing, where it can drive downward from the executive. Uh, More often than not, it doesn't start at the shop floor level. Uh, on rare occasion, it might, but more often than not, the folks on the floor are looking for guidance on what they should be doing and how they can support the business and what the expectations are and that sort of thing. So I think it's really important that that occur up at the highest level. The higher, the better. I've worked with companies where I went in at the mid level, you know, and moved upward with, the folks that were trying to accomplish something. But that might not be the preferred approach. It worked in that case. In fact, I've seen it work a couple of times, but I think it's preferable to have the executive maybe be educated a little bit about some of these principles that you and I are on about, and then drive it from there downward. So I don't know if I've answered your question. Where do we start? You just start. But there's got to be some information forthcoming, some spark, right? Maybe it's a spark from a guy who's new and he's bringing some great ideas in, and he demonstrates it, moves it up. Maybe it's a spark from a new executive who has been there and done that, the things that we talk about, who's driving it. But there has to be some sort of initiating effort from some quarter, and that usually will happen when a company's in dire straits, because something has to happen.
Okay.
So,
So you're saying just start. What are some of the mistakes that companies make in trying to get their employees and their organizations aligned that you've seen?
yeah, well, in answering that, let me back up just a little bit
Sure.
and make a couple of observations. There's a book that I have great admiration for now that I've read it. On the other hand, it was a real boring, dull, god-awful book to read. So the book was Organizational Psychology. It was written by a guy named Edgar Schein about 30, 40 years ago. And he had some really good research and had some interesting observations. And it had to do with, organizational alignment, competition, that sort of thing within companies. And his observation was that, organizing, creating an organizational structure naturally creates competing groups, competing maybe individuals for promotion, competing departments for kudos, competing divisions, all that sort of thing. And the point being that people are naturally competitive. And that can work to your advantage or your disadvantage. And that is, if the competition is destructive, as I've seen it in some cases, then it works to your disadvantage. If the competition is aligned to some common goals, then it's healthy. You get a lot of energy. So, and what he says is, if you have a lot of task interdependence, for example, production and maintenance are highly interdependent. Marketing and manufacturing are highly interdependent. R&D and manufacturing are highly interdependent. So when you have these interdependencies, then collaboration becomes essential. Collaboration under a common strategy and set of goals, collaboration with common information and common measures and so on. So it's just really important that people recognize the task interdependency and that they be aligned to some common set of principles and goals. And so how do we do that? Well, he refers to having superordinate goals that take priority over group interests. And superordinate goals in a company might be increasing market share in a particular market. It might be having a particular profit level or return on assets or return on capital, whatever it may be. And then the strategy that goes to support that. And then the measures, and this is the important point here, is that the measures have to facilitate collaboration. And so just maybe a couple examples, and I don't know if I'm answering your question. So when I get done talking, you can tell me and redirect me, and we'll be better aligned. So, you got to have some, measures. So for example, I've seen circumstances, good and bad, where shifts, when you have a manufacturing production operation where shifts do things that are counterproductive to the strategy and goals of the organization. They're not aligned because they've been incentivized to beat one another. If this shift produces most product, it gets a case of beer or $10,000 reward or whatever. And that tends to create destructive behaviors when you reward one shift over another. And you don't create some sort of collaborative approach. On the other hand, if you award the performance of the line with each shift sharing and helping each other, then that tends to create, proper, better performance. So that's one example. Another would be between, say, production and maintenance. If you hold maintenance accountable for PM compliance and maintenance costs, and you don't consider that as a part of production's, accountable measures, then they don't care if they break the equipment. They don't care if the PM schedule isn't met. because you're holding them accountable for, on time in full production. And so they'll do that to the exclusion of doing a proper maintenance effort. And it's really when you hold both accountable for example, production and maintenance schedule compliance, and hold both accountable for maintenance and repair costs, that you get the collaboration so that you balance those competing interests. They're always in tension with one another. So having superordinate goals, having measures that facilitate collaboration, and sometimes even having some sort of partnership agreement, where you sit down and you, like your charter that you mentioned, where you sit down, you articulate what you're going to do together. And those things are quite helpful in getting people to work to a common purpose, superordinate goals. So anyways, did I answer the question? I don't remember the question now.
Well, the question was, what were some of the mistakes? But
Well, the
I think
mistakes are not having that.
yeah, exactly. And if I could just elaborate on one that I've seen that's relatively common, is they start out with good intentions of doing this, but then they fall right into working with silos, even with the effort, right? Because what they'll do is they'll have different meetings for uh, department managers on up and leadership, and then the message from the CEO or whoever the executive is that's sponsoring this doesn't get directly fed to the people that are most responsible for making it happen, those that are on the shop floor, right? So
Yeah.
it's one of those things that, and it doesn't necessarily have to be face to face. It certainly is more meaningful when it is, but in a day and age where we have things like Zoom, where you could put people in a conference room and have that person come on and speak to the message that they want it delivered to everybody, right? It makes a big difference, right, for the employees to actually see that executive sponsor speak up and say, okay, this is what we're looking to do, and this is how we want to get it done, right?
Yeah.
And I need your ideas, right? And I need that communication that comes back. So
Yeah.
uh,
Well, I've always been a big proponent of having as much transparency in an organization as possible. Now, I understand that some issues, with privacy and all that sort of thing are, you can't disclose personal matters,
right.
but sharing, profit and loss statements, sharing what's driving those, sharing new initiatives, sharing all those things, and how that fits into the overall strategy and goals, I think is really important, essential even, to get folks aligned to that strategy and goals. One other comment I would give you is, at the executive level or even departmental manager level, uh, articulating the strategy and goals and relative roles to link it back to achieving the strategy. I think that has to be done over and over and over and over, because you can't just say it once, because people forget. In fact, you can't say it twice because they forget again or they misinterpret. So it's a continuing, effort to achieve that. So that's, just another comment on all that. Any?
All right. So when it comes to now um, going across organizations, right? We've been kind of talking, you know, leadership to operations and maintenance, but realistically, you've got purchasing involved, you've got sales involved, you've got quality involved, you've got health, safety, environment involved. Getting all those organizations uh, to understand what that message is, right? How much regular communication is required between each of those now to make a solid initiative work?
Well, what have done and would recommend is, it depends on what level you're at. you know, if you're at the shop floor level, maybe it's kind of like your daily safety brief. Maybe it's the daily management meeting where you stand in a room, you review what happened last night, what you're going to do today, and what the issues are. At an executive level, you know, at the, you know, president, CEO level, I think something on the order of once a quarter, you probably ought to have what I used to call an away day. You know, when I was president of CSI, once a quarter, we would spend the day away from, you know, the business and review our performance. And sometimes that would be very specific and explicit, you know, bookings and cash and profitability and maybe new product development. Sometimes it would be, you know, more broadly cast in terms of, you know, where the markets were going and how we were going to support the markets and how we were going to, in some cases, drive and influence the markets relative to our products. So, you know, and it could be, you know, everything in between. It's really as needed, but notionally, you know, there ought to be a time to pause and reflect at really at every level. And maybe the morning meetings might be 5 or 10 minutes. The quarterly meeting might be a full day or even two. And those require quite a bit of preparation as well. And maybe at a departmental level, monthly. So and I use calendar because we tend to think in terms of calendar. You know, it might be something more particular to an elapsed function, or when you complete or reach a milestone for a particular function.
All right. So I always go back to, you know, you talked about a daily safety brief or a shift brief. I like to go back to one of the things that I talk to my customers about that it actually, I was lucky enough that I got my very first customer to grasp this and understand it, which was the measure of OEE shift by shift. And that was something that changed their shift interaction, right? They actually had a crossover of 20 minutes each day. And their plant manager, when he started this, said, I was amazed what I saw when we first started measuring this, because it typically we paid that 20-minute shift change and it was like a couple guys just, you know, a couple of ships passing. They waved at one another, one coming in on the way and one going on the way out, right? And then all of a sudden, when they were measuring this, they had something to talk about, right?
Right.
Because they knew, you know, this is what's typical for the machine, shift to shift. And when you're looking at, it's normally 78 or 82, and you come in and it's 64, holy smokes, what happened last night,
Yeah.
right? And there's information exchange. Well, then the next thing you know, the maintenance guys are looking at that information, right? They're getting passed on to them. And he said, we had this mistake that we had maintenance starting, you know, a half hour later than what shift change was for operations, right? By the time they come in, because the thought process was, well, then we'll know what we got to tell maintenance to do, right? And in reality, they should have been involved in that shift change. It should have been something they were all doing together, right? To
Right.
say,
Yeah.
all right, here's our lead people, the line leaders, get them together and take 15, 20 minutes and say, here's where we're at, right?
Yeah.
And you talk about aligning an organization. What's your responsibility in that? And that was one of the pieces that, you know, as we went down the line, what's safety's piece in OEE? What's quality's piece in OEE? What's purchasing? How do they impact it? Right. And we find out that every part of the organization actually has an impact on it, and they had never even considered that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So just by doing a measure, they're not doing root cause analysis, they're not doing RCM, they aren't even talking about, at that point, their hierarchy was a mess, right? They had way too many PMs, but all of a sudden, when you start talking about what's going on and how do we make this better, right? All of a sudden, those ideas start coming out when you see where your losses are located.
Yeah. Well, another technique done at the shop floor level is, and I harp on this quite a bit because I think it's really important in terms of supporting alignment, is having what I've always referred to as structured improvement time.
Mm-hmm.
we're once a month, once a week, once a whatever, it's going to be context dependent. You pull together, people that need to collaborate, cooperate to achieve a particular objective, and you have them work together to achieve that. And the most common example that I've seen used is where you pull together a cross-functional team, production, maintenance, engineering, whoever it might be, to restore a particular line or machine itself. It's like a pumping station or a compressor, whatever. Restore it to like new. And it might, in fact, you might even have vendors come in. And again, that takes some prep and it takes a little bit of leadership, somebody to coordinate the entire effort. But when you have that, then people begin to appreciate what each other does, what the impediments are, to doing that, and the role that they may be playing in creating the impediments or facilitating the success. And it's just a nice way for facilitating cooperation, collaboration, and ultimately alignment to some common purpose. So, yeah, that my wife just stopped by and dropped me a note. The cleaning lady is here. Yells, "Don't do my office." So, anyway, apologies for that interruption.
Hey, no problem. So I have my own issues going on today. Normally, as we say, Monday, Tuesday work great for us. And then I have the grandkids today. So luckily it's a beautiful day outside. So I can hear them every once in a while. They're out there riding their bikes. So.
Okay. Well, if something happens, you run and I'll tend to this, I just don't want the cleaning lady turning on the vacuum or dusting behind me. So, anyways, moving on. One other thing, and no, this is more of a philosophical point that I think is important, and that is a quote from Winston LaDay. Winston has a lot of really good insight in all this, and he said, "You got to make it easy for people to do the right thing, and make it hard for them to do the wrong thing."
Yep.
And so, if you articulate a compelling strategy and set of goals, and you create these, superordinate goals, and you create these measures that facilitate collaboration, and then you create this structured improvement time where people actually cooperate, understand, resolve conflicts in some cases, or facilitate a more cooperative relationship, you're going to get that. But you have to kind of make it easy for people to do all that. So the executives have to create, the expectation of structured improvement time. They have to provide the time and the resources for people to do that. Sometimes they have to provide an external facilitator, like you, for example, to do some of that stuff. And so when you make it easy for them to do the right thing, well, they're far more likely to do it. But if you put obstacles in their way, then they're more likely to get discouraged and say, well, what's the point? I've tried and tried and tried. I quit. And then they become, what do you call it? Passive aggressive.
Yeah.
I'm going to do only what you say, exactly as you say it. Go ahead, dummy.
So another issue, going back to your scheduled improvement time, I had an example of one that wasn't quite scheduled, but it came around as a result of they had an edict from management that they had a hiring freeze, right?
Yeah.
And as this time went on, attrition naturally occurred. They were still not replacing people, right? And so they had some pretty solid safety practices in place, and those practices said, in order to run this line, you got to have 5 operators on the line. So when you get down to where you don't have a floater any longer and somebody's got to go to the bathroom, you got to shut the line down. Somebody gets a phone call, they got to shut the line down. So all of a sudden they're seeing this on their OEE, and they're struggling with, how do we deal with this loss, right? So here I am coming in as an outsider saying, well, gosh, I walked through your engineering office and you got planners and schedulers and engineers and technicians, and I think there's an accountant in there. There's a bunch of people in there. There's what are they doing? And well, they all have jobs. Well, but they can't for 5 minutes go operate a machine when somebody's got to go to the bathroom. Oh man, you know what kind of chaos that would create? And I said, look, it's just a simple idea. It's what first came into my head, right? And interesting enough, the manager that was sitting there listening to me said, you know what, we're going to try that for a little bit, right? And 2 months later, the comments were completely different. It was, do you know how much I learned by having to go out and operate
Yeah.
15 minutes, right?
Yeah.
and when you realize that what people have to do and what they have to go through, all of a sudden those things where you talk about make success easier, make things easier, and people do it, right?
Yeah.
All of a sudden there's a lot of ideas coming out of people that all of a sudden had to do a job they weren't used to doing.
Yeah.
Right? And they realized how difficult we'd made it on people, right? So
Well, that sounds like a mini version of Undercover Boss.
yeah, exactly.
Do this job, see if
Yeah.
you can do it. And it turns out they're really bad at it. So they would, I don't know if you've watched that very much, but sometimes they actually get fired.
Right. And the comments were, that came back were, it was comical at times. It was frustrating at times. Um, but overall, it ended up being a positive experience for everybody. Right.
Yeah. Well,
Were
it's
they,
like that old phrase, walk a mile in my shoes and see how it feels. Yeah.
and not only that, it helped with communication, because now you're working with people that you might not even have known what their name was.
Yeah.
Right. And all of a sudden you're having to work together, and when you see that person in the hallway and they say, hey, could you come take a look at something for just a minute, right? There's a relationship now, right?
Yeah.
And that makes a big difference.
Yeah. Well, another point that's sort of peripheral related, but I think it's really important is don't, if you're trying to get better organizational alignment and, better performance, lower costs, as everybody is trying to do, don't focus on headcount reduction.
Yeah.
Because you can't get people involved in improving performance if they know after they improve things, you're going to fire them. That's just not motivational. And just, everybody needs to go back and look at their own data. But what I've seen is that, the labor costs in a manufacturing organization generally run anywhere from 5 to maybe as high as 20-25% of your total costs. Well, let's pick a middle number. Let's say it's 15% of your manufacturing costs are labor. Well, the question I would ask if I were the site manager, VP, CEO would be, how are we applying that 15% labor to reduce the 85% of all the other costs? Because that's where the money is.
Yep.
And if you're focused on the 15% and how you get that down, well, you can cut 10% of your workforce. What does that give you in terms of lowered costs? Well, about 1.5%. Well, that's in the noise level. On the other hand, if you can get that 15%, reducing the 85% by 10%, well, that's pretty damn significant. And if you can do that, you can probably go after more market share. You can probably invest in some capital that you've been delaying because you don't have the cash flow to support it. It creates a lot more opportunity for you. So now I'm not saying you don't ever have layoffs. There are times when you may have to, when the market tanks, or if you've got just a really bloated totally bloated organization. But your first choice ought to be getting the guys doing the work aligned to that strategy, that purpose, with some measures that facilitate collaboration and with some structured improvement time to get them to help you reduce the 85%. Then that makes the 15% far more productive, which means that the overall business success is likely going to improve. So, and then a separate comment, you said scheduled improvement time. I use the word structured. The structure includes the schedule, but then there has to be some notional rules around, the time and how you're going to spend it, and who's going to facilitate it, and, some structure around how you're going to go about that. So just a minor point here.
All right. So you mentioned earlier when you were with CSI that you guys would have that day away.
Yep.
That comes down in my mind, and I realized that was for communication. How do you go about celebrating those milestones that you make? Right. That's another question that often comes out. We don't know whether we should doing this on a person-to-person basis, on a team basis, on a shift basis. How do we deal with those milestones?
Well, the short answer is yes to what you just described. You might do it at lots of levels. I can just give you my philosophy, okay, and how we tried to reward, folks for doing a good job. We had an overall award system. If the company did well, we reserved, and I don't remember the exact number now. Wade Letzinger was the guy that did the numbers, but we reserved about something like 10% of our profit, pre-tax profit. We reserved about 10% to allocate on some formula basis. Everybody got whatever, a 5% bonus in their 5% of their paycheck in bonus in their paycheck. So that was one element, one component. And then we had individual awards. So if somebody did an outstanding job on something, or saved the company a bunch of money, or got, helped us avoid a particularly sticky issue, then we had a separate pot of money that we used to reward individuals. So it was allocated based. Most of the money, by the way, was distributed fairly evenly, because we wanted people to feel like they were a part of that success and they got a little money. And yeah, I know some people, well, I did more than he did. He got as much as I did. Yeah, okay. What's your point? You're never going to have a 100% equitable system. But if people are if you make the point that you're trying to do this fairly and equitably, and it's never going to be totally, perceived as totally fair to everybody, but you're going to do your best. And I think most people they might grouse a bit. Some of them, a few of them might grouse a bit, and then, go on, carry on. But back to the part of the question, for example, you don't give the shift that makes the most product a case of beer or a
Right.
$10,000 bonus. You give the production line, right, a reward of some sort for upping the level of quality production output, whatever it may be, reducing the changeover times, whatever it may be. You reward the team, as it were, all 4 shifts or whatever it may be. You reward all of them. And then if you have one person in particular that was instrumental in all that, then you might have a little separate recognition ceremony. It might be take them out to dinner, it might be a little money, it might be a article in the newsletter highlighting that person and maybe 2 or 3 other folks who did a good job. But, recognition of their contribution, I think, goes a long way. And sometimes it's something as simple as going out and saying thank you.
Yep.
Good job. I really appreciate what you did. So what are you going to do next? So I don't know if I've answered your question.
Yes, you have, absolutely. I will say that in the past, when we've had, and this is back to my Kodak days, when we did have one shift that was outperforming the others, then the question became why, right? What's going on? What are they doing differently?
Yeah.
That's another opportunity to improve because somebody's missing something, right? Are they doing setup better? What are they doing better that the output there is consistently better than what the other two shifts or the other shift is doing?
Yeah.
So it creates a learning opportunity as well. But I do agree 100%. When you celebrate that you've made a milestone, you do that with the entire organization.
Yeah.
So Ron, we are ticking by on time here, and normally we'd be at a point where we'd ask people if they had questions. You have anything else to wrap up with for this
No,
topic?
just, the big issues to me are, the things I hope we've highlighted. And that is you have to articulate a compelling strategy, set of goals, and respective roles linking each person, notionally. It doesn't have to be down to the, nitty gritty, but linking each person's role and their contribution to achieving that strategy and goals. And you have to have some measures that facilitate collaboration, a process that does that, and then having some process whereby you get people working together. So, structured improvement time in there, because in any organization, you're going to have, lots of different personalities, skills, values, and so on. So there has to be some methodology for getting those folks aligned to the superordinate goals and some processes to facilitate their collaboration, cooperation towards achieving that. So that's, the sum and substance of it.
All right, that's a great summary.
All right. Well, if y'all have questions for us or things you want to pose that we can try to answer, we'll be glad to try to do that. And you can, send us an email or send us a question or whatever, and we'll try to come back to you.
All
So
right.
with that, thank you all for joining us, and we'll see in a week or 2 weeks. There's a schedule out there somewhere. The marketing guys will let you know what the schedule is. We'll see you next time and hope you can join us.
All right. Have a great day, Ron.
Thanks. You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.